This tutorial is going to be walking you through creating more of a sketchy or drawing type of style for tracing an image. So the first thing again that you need to start out with is adding a new layer so that you're not drawing on top of your original image. So when we hide that, you're able to see again just your drawing. A couple of different things you can adjust for the settings at the top. I would maybe lower the flow a little bit so that you're able to continuously go over certain areas to kind of build up the shading as you're drawing. And I would keep this button pressed right here so you're able to adjust your lines so that some are darker and some are lighter as you're drawing, depending on the amount of pressure that you're putting with your pen. For the color, I'm just going to choose black for right now and hit OK. And then for the paintbrush size, leaving it at using a regular brush, and then maybe a brush size of around 10 will probably be the best. So it's going to look something like this as you're sketching with your brush. But I'm going to undo that, and starting out I am going to zoom in a little bit on my image here so I can be fairly detailed as I'm tracing around my picture. I'm going to start out with the lips and just start going over different areas, and instead of creating or drawing with one line like this, what we did with the last graphic tutorial, instead of that, again, I'm just drawing with a couple of different lines overlapping, varying the pressure that I'm putting with my pen here on the tablet, so you can see how some of these lines are lighter, and then as I press more, these lines will become a little bit darker. So I'm just creating more of that sketchy drawing quality as I'm going around and kind of tracing around some of the outlines here for my image. So I'm just tracing around the lips. In some of the darker areas where there might be shadows, such as this top lip here, there's a little bit of a shadow, I can press a little bit harder with my brush or with my pen here, and then it's going to create more of either a texture or more of a shadow in those areas that are a bit darker. I'm going to zoom up a little bit more on the nose now, so I'm going to trace around the outside here, again overlapping my lines and just continuing to trace around the different areas. Again, in the shadows, I'm going over my lines a couple of times to create a little bit of a darker area there. So I'm going to continue and just keep sliding around my view as I'm tracing around my picture. So now I'm zoomed in and working a little bit on my eye. Again, I'm pressing a little bit harder in some of the darker shadows, and where I see some of the highlights, so this white part of the eye, I'm going to leave that white. So just like what I would do if I'm drawing on a regular piece of paper, I might fill in some of these shadows underneath the eye. So everywhere where you see a darker shadow or a darker line is what you would trace. So here's these darker lines for the eyebrow. I'm going to keep going over again in this sketchy technique where I'm just moving my pen back and forth on my tablet. And again, here's a little bit of a shadow I might fill in around the eye. Zooming out, you can start to see how this looks. If I hide my background image, you can see how your picture actually looks on this background. Now, if you wanted to get rid of this checkerboard background, what I would do is add another layer, and you can click and move that below the layer that has your drawing on it. And if you go to your paint bucket tool, which is just a little bit below your paintbrush in the tool panel, click on that, and then if you switch the color here to white, you can use your paint bucket and fill that background white, so you can really start to see your drawing come to life here. So I'm going to go back to my drawing, though I still have a little bit more to work on, so I'm going to hide that white layer, and I'm going to make sure I'm selected again on my layer that I was drawing on, and I'm going to continue and start just filling in the hair. So I'm going back to my paintbrush, and as I'm filling in the hair, again I am using my black color and just going back and forth over the different areas where there might be a shadow. So trying to keep that sketchy technique. You can see the hair comes out a little bit into the background here, so I'm just tracing that, following along the best I can with where those darker lines are. So down here in this shadow, I'm really going to fill that in. Might even make my paintbrush a little bit bigger so it goes faster to really fill in all of that space that's darker. And I might just go around and fill in all of my dark shadows while I have my bigger paintbrush, just to keep it easy here. And then I'll go back and start using my smaller brush size again. Just fill in the rest of the hair. But go ahead and start filling out your picture that you have there and trace around all of the different areas. Make sure again you're using more of the sketchy technique, so you're not tracing around areas like what we did in the last picture. Instead, you're trying to find where all of the shadows are and just kind of go over those darker areas to create an interesting texture and drawing as you're filling all of this in. So here's my image with mostly everything filled in and traced. So if I hide my background image and bring back that white layer, I can really start to see what my tracing here looks like. And a couple of different things you can do with your tracing when you're finished. You could adjust the size of your layer, so if you hold down Command T, and again if you want to change that, make it a little bit smaller, you can maybe bring your picture layer back. So I'm going to hit enter, bring my picture layer back, and put both of them side by side, so you could maybe do something interesting like this for your final image and just decide where you want your different designs to go. Maybe I want it to be slightly larger than my actual picture. So I could stretch the size of this layer again and hit enter and then move this around. So there's a lot of different things you could do with your image after you've traced and created an interesting sketching technique on your picture. But when you're finished, make sure you save this as a JPEG and then submit to Classroom for credit.